Good evening, everyone. My name is Shubhashish. नाम तो सुना ही होगा. So, welcome back to our initiative Mission Means 2022. And as it is Thursday, we are doing economy and agriculture. Now, these are the topics that I'm taking up. So, the first question is on capital account convertibility. It's an important topic, but somewhere I feel this would have been a bit sidelined. So, please prioritize this. So, this is important. If you just Google this term, also you'll find the statements of the Reserve Bank of India talking about being cautious on implementation of the full convertibility of full capital account convertibility. Right. So this is the complete question, correct question. Okay. Then we are witnessing. I've changed this question. This was a previous year question, so I've changed this. What is the impact of the recent phenomena of currency depreciation in the world trade, and how does it affect the macroeconomic stability of our country, right? So this is what is happening. So we should be prepared. It's a simple question of judging our understanding of economic concepts, and such questions are asked in the paper. As you can see, the one in 2018. Okay. Then we have a question on inclusive growth. It's a previous year question, but it makes sense even today. So inclusive growth, which is linked with the careless and useless manpower. And to me, this means careless. I really don't know what it means. There is this website known as GS Code you must have heard about. So they have translated this into careless. Careless, less attention has been given to them. I really don't know if that is right approach or not. But yes, when we say useless manpower, it means lack of skills. So demographic dividend is there, more useful population, but we are seeing that they're not skilled enough to get good jobs. And maybe we can talk about careless is not getting the skills or the training, or we can also talk about the protests that take place by the youth. So that could be something, or those who can be swayed away into drugs or other things. Be anything. Okay. So what measures need to be taken? So it's relevant. Even today, there was an article on demographic dividend, double whammy of the demographic dividend. So that was there. Okay. Then in this year itself, there was this news on National Monetisation Pipeline, which was strongly criticized. We don't expect UPSC to frame that way. But yes, we are having a question on this where we have to assess the NMP. Then quite recently, transit-oriented development policy was released by the Ministry of Urban Development. So naturally, so what is this transit-oriented development policy, and how does it affect or impact urbanization in India? Plus, we say that India is going to be 30% is urbanized, and by the next 20 years, about 50% of India would be urbanized. Right. So this is again a very, very important theme. In fact, previously a question was asked on national urban transport policy. Somewhere, urban transport and transit-oriented development policy, they are more or less the same thing. So similar question can be asked. So that again was about how does it affect the economy or the urban setup. Fine. Now, before going ahead, this is a course program, so personal guidance program where we prepare personalized timetable for each student according to their requirements. If they are in coaching or outside of coaching, but they want support, they want to do self-study, they want guidance, doubt clearance. They write their answers, but they want it to be checked. So this is a program, and the fee is very, very nominal. For the time being, it is at 5,000 rupees for the entire cycle of 2023. And we are also loading our own website and the portal, so I may have to raise the fee over there. Right, so this is a good opportunity. If you wish, you can enroll, and it will really help you. And I've seen some positive results already. Okay, so let's come to this question. First question: examine the proposal of full capital account convertibility while elaborating its pros and cons. Naturally, when you are being asked about capital account convertibility, it's an idea, full convertibility. So you will tell what are the pros and cons. That's a given. That's a 150 word question, so we have to be very, very direct. So you can start by saying that we have this, in the balance of payment, we have the current account and the capital account. So current account comes into play when, let's say, I buy a Zoom subscription. So Zoom is a foreign company, Zoom.us. So I'm paying something and I'm receiving a service, or I'm selling a service or a post to a foreign person. So trade in goods, trades in services, that is under the current account. It's already there is full convertibility over there. I don't have I don't have to take permission if I want to buy something from the government, or it's the currency convertibility is free. So rupee to dollar, I spend rupees, automatically that person gets dollars. Then comes capital convertibility. So here we have only partial convertibility, right? So partial capital account convertibility. Now before that, what is capital account? Typically, capital account is where it's about acquiring assets or selling off assets. Right, so it's about assets and liabilities. It's long term in nature, and naturally, when you're talking about assets like, let's say I buy a house or I borrow money from outside, so I take a liability. So these are huge amounts and for a longer duration of time. So the government has been skeptical, no matter which government, they have been skeptical about introduction of full capital account convertibility. And that is understandable because we can see it now also with the conversion of the foreign portfolio foreign portfolio investments going away from India to outside. So that is a big risk. Tomorrow, if there is full capital account convertibility, if there are no restrictions, we can see a huge flight of money, or Indians also parking their money elsewhere. This may have certain big risks over it. It has its advantages also. Freely money can come to India, or we can leverage foreign institution for investments or borrowing money. So that would be a great goal. Right. So this is how we have to write, and you can easily find the content. So you can just read this briefly. Okay, so this is this concept, briefly mention the concept. Then this thing happened, the current account convertibility, capital account, the government was unwilling. But because of the dire straits of the Indian economy before 1991, so the new economic reform suggested convertibility. So Narasimha committee had suggested, and from there on, current account convertibility is to the fullest extent. Capital has been made, capital account convertibility is partially done. And it is done in such a way that it encourages more of inflows into the economy and less of outflows. So it is in single direction. It is in favor of the inflows. And at present moment, we have partial capital account convertibility. And at the present moment, the currency regulation is being done by a law known as Foreign Exchange Management Act, and it's being implemented by Ministry of Finance. Important for pre actually. Okay, so briefly, very briefly, like it's not even asked, so just briefly just state some brief background. Actually, I shared this what if it's asked in 250 words. Okay, now the pros and cons. So free flow of capital will take place. So first is the pros, advantages. It will attract investments. Naturally, if somebody knows that they are, if there's something wrong happens with this country, let's say India or any other country, we can easily move away of funds. We can take away funds. So that freedom is there. That concern is not there that our money will get locked in this country. So naturally, this would attract investment. So India would become a favored investment destination. And if investments come to India, if money comes to India, naturally, it is good. It can be leveraged by Indians. It could be leveraged by the industrialists. Right? We can leverage the global markets. We can invest in other countries of the world and take benefit of, let's say, better returns, more stability. Access to external commercial borrowings, right? So 3-4 points we mentioned over here. Then what are the shortcomings? There was a committee known as the Tarapur Committee. There are two committees and all. And Tarapur Committee said, right, we have to go to full convertibility, but he also set a roadmap actually. He said that certain things have to be done before we go to full capital account convertibility. Naturally, it's a bit dangerous. So he said that, it's even the best of the countries who have the best of the macroeconomic indicators, even they are not without risk. If something wrong happens, if there is full capital account convertibility, there can be free movement of money outside of their country, and actually that will not be good. So he was skeptical later, and he framed certain guidelines. Okay, so we can mention the views of Tarapur Committee. It's the same thing actually. It's risky. We have to be cautious, and in fact, almost every Reserve Bank of India governor has stated this. Okay, this can amount to unregulated drain of wealth. It can also amount to money laundering. Imagine, when the Panama leaks were announced. Remember Panama leaks? Panama was a tax haven, and many of the Indians had parked their money over there, and many other places actually. So in tax haven, so avoid tax payment of taxes. So if full convertibility is there, then naturally this would be more encouraged. So that can happen. You can park your Kala Dhan in different countries. At present moment, there is a regulation set by the FEMA. Okay. Now, if that happens, if all of this happens, it will lead to the rising current account deficit. It will amount to depreciation of currency, especially in the bad times. Right? Then give a conclusion. So in conclusion, you can mention this, that we need to have a cautious approach as stated by several governors of the RBI. We can take into account, if you want to go to full convertibility, take into account the recommendations of Tarapur Committee, which had set out certain guidelines. So briefly, you can mention this in a line. Don't really have to mention the facts. Okay, so we are done with this thing. Now coming to this second question. How would the recent phenomena of currency volatility in the world trade affect macroeconomic stability of India? I think I just explained this. So you can start your answer by talking about the recent event of the depreciation of the Indian currency. Briefly, you can also give out the reasons for it, which you would be knowing actually because it's so current. Okay. Now, how does it affect the macroeconomic stability of our country? So one, naturally, currency will depreciate, the fuel prices will increase. So naturally, this will lead to cost push inflation. There will be a slowdown in the economic growth because of the inflationary effect, and overall impact on the macroeconomic stability also. It will affect the revenue growth of the government. Okay, so yeah, so this is there. It will affect the investment flow, new investments, because given the unstable macroeconomic conditions of a particular country, like even in India, we have that the investments are coming down. Interestingly, today's news, they say industrial output has increased for this quarter, but we expect the industrial output to be low, them to be cautious. In fact, some time back, there was a consumer confidence survey from the Reserve Bank of India, which had taken the feedback of the industries also. So they had brought out this point that we are not confident about the Indian economy. Demand in the economy will get affected because of the high inflation. All of this would lead to unemployment, naturally, and the rising current account deficit. You can mention the CAD thing first. Now, the next question, comment on the challenges for inclusive growth, which includes careless and useless manpower in the Indian context. So, inclusive growth, first of all, let's do the terms inclusive and careless, useless manpower. Seems very hard, right? Okay, so when we say inclusive growth means that the gains of the growth are shared by all. It is not like one person is getting very, very rich, others are getting poor. So for this, you have to state a fact. You define inclusive growth, and you can state the Oxfam report talking about the rising inequality. So any indicator which tells us about the inequality. You can also use this term like we are witnessing jobless growth. So jobless growth or rising poverty are also an indication of lack of inclusive growth. Like, the GDP growth, our GDP is growing at 7 to 8% annually, but the creation of jobs is only 1.8%, 1 to 1.8%. So if 8% GDP is growing by 8%, so the gains, naturally gains via employment, the job creation should be comparable, but it is only taking place at 1.8%. So it is disproportionate. So that means that people are not getting the gains. Okay. Now, careless and useless manpower, I think we had explained earlier also. This is an apparent reference to the demographic dividend. So demographic dividend, that is, we are having more youthful population. It's believed that the youthful population would peak by 2036. This was in today's newspaper. I was referring net. So some papers have said 2041. Nobody knows this to be exact. So that leeway that you have. Okay. So we are expected to have demographic dividend. We were expected to do well because of this. But then our manpower is careless and useless. Why? Lack of skills, lack of availability of jobs. Right, so they have careless and useless. Now come back to the question, comment on the challenges for inclusive growth, which include careless and useless manpower. You can start your answer by talking about briefly what is inclusive growth and then link it that link it with the aspect of careless and useless manpower, talking about the unskilled type of workforce. About 5% of India is our youth workforce is skilled, formally skilled. Okay, right. So you have to state this over here, elaborate this, and then come to the measures. So what measures should be taken? So first of all, we need to create more jobs. Now there was an article also which we're talking about that we need to have an employment policy, right? So that should be there, which is focusing on job creation. So a job should be created. We want to, the government should invest in job intensive sectors. So that should be done. So job intensive like textile industry, leather industry. So those should be promoted. Besides this, we know that the private sector has not been able to monitor, has not been able to create adequate amount of jobs. Private economy is further strained because of the pandemic. We want the public sector should step up spending, especially via infrastructure. So infrastructure, if they invest, there's creation of infrastructure, which is a platform for creation of, it's a platform for private sector to do their activities. So that is there, right? So stepping up public sector or rising expenditure from the public sector being the engine of economic growth. So that should become, and further, we need to invest in soft infrastructure, which includes education and healthcare sector. So these are the measures that should come over here. Now moving on to the next question. This is about the National Monetization Pipeline. So the question is very simple. There is a statement, or let me just talk about National Monetization Pipeline and then come to the question. So National Monetization Pipeline had come from the Niti Aayog, so they recommended this. They said that there are various assets that are lying with the government. There are various underutilized public assets, like these PSUs have big lands, huge amount of lands they have huge amount of buildings. They are not optimally used. Sometimes they have like airlines, etc. They have spectrum. So a lot of spectrum is there, which is lying vacant, which can be handed over to the private sector, and that could provide high-speed internet, coal mines, you name it, highways. So there are a lot of these assets which were created by the government. Now these assets, since they are not efficiently utilized, the government can sell them, or not sell them actually, the government can monetize them. They can hand this over to the private sector for a certain tenure of time. Right, so when they hand it over, so private sector takes control over this, and it will take control if by giving out money to the government. So this would result in government raising capital, which can be used to create additional infrastructure that is beneficial to the society, to the Indian society, to the Indian economy. So more infrastructure creation can be done. So that is the idea of the National Monetization Pipeline. Thing is that private sector is not adequately, not in that position right now to invest in infrastructure. Public sector, it is raising the tax revenues. They are also constrained at the moment. So if they monetize, if they free up the locked capital or underutilized capital by handing it over to the private sector, the government gets capital which can be used for more creation of infrastructure. So that will benefit the society, that will spur up economic growth. And private sector would be able to better monetize, better utilize the underutilized public assets that were not being used very well. Now those can be used. For example, spectrum, which your 5G, 4G things are working. So they can use it much more efficiently because they want to earn the maximum out of that. Likewise, lands, the unused lands. So those land acquisition is a problem. Give this land to the private sector and they can use it for manufacturing, use it for anything that will in addition create jobs. So we will have more efficient economy. So that is the basic idea of this thing. So it's actually this thing has to be explained over here. You can either start by talking about the National Monetization Pipeline, link it with the underutilized public assets. I think that is what I would recommend because, hit the nail on its head. So directly talk about this thing and then talk about the philosophy by linking it with the monetizing and the utilized public assets, which will bring in required capital. Right? It's basically we have to elaborate the statement with the flow of things. Now we have some facts. So they say the government says, Niti Aayog says that it will raise about 6 lakh crores through core assets of the central government over a period of 4 years from fiscal year 2022 to fiscal year 2025. Normally, I'll tell you something, these are overstated. But still 6 lakh crore is a very, very big amount. So what are the advantages? I think I've already explained, so you can just read this or take a screenshot of this. Right, so this is it. Then concerns associated with it. First of all, you say 6 lakh crores, will you actually be able to raise that? That is a concern. Big announcements, don't elaborate it this way. But realizing adequate value, the target set may be a challenge given the constrained nature of the Indian economy or the limited paying capacity of the private sector at the moment. Something like that you can mention. Okay. Execution risk, it's a very, very big project, 6 lakh crores worth of projects. So obviously there will be implementational challenges given the geographical expanse, the quantum of work involved, everything is difficult. Now these projects, all these public assets that have been created, they were created using the taxpayers' money. Now they are saying that if you want to use this asset, let's say an highway was there, which was not, created by public money, not by private money. So there is no question of having tolls over there. So tolls are normally there when, let's say, the highway was to be built by, let's say, Larsen and Toubro or the GMR, any of these companies. So the private companies will eventually put a toll, and anybody who is going by this route will have to pay money for it. So user pay concept is there. But now the project that was made by the taxpayers' money, so people have already paid for this. This money, this is project is being sold, and then it is transferred to the private sector via the toll operate transfer. Right, so this concept is being used. So it is double burdening the taxpayers via user pay charges. Okay, then in a country there is a problem of contractual enforcement. Right, it will also create a monopolistic outlook. The government giving out certain asset to the private sector, and let's say you do however you want to utilize it. So it will lead to creation of a monopolistic mindset, and ultimately, when they do it with a profit mindset, it will lead to exploitation of the end user. So that is a concern. Okay, so these are more about Niti Aayog on NMP, and it is associated with brownfield projects. Projects that are already there, so those are being handed over to brownfield projects. And the philosophy is that government develops something, commissions it, then sells it, and reinvests in something else. Right, so in national infrastructure. Okay, so your answer should close over here. And now the conclusion. The conclusion is basically a remark on what you feel on the National Monetization Pipeline. You can close it with a positive remark. Maybe give out that mentioning some shortcomings which should be addressed, or should be implemented in a cautious way. That way you can close. Don't outrightly criticize it. Okay, last question. Discuss the transit-oriented development policy and its impact on urbanization. Fine. So transit-oriented. So which the cities are there. So why not create the cities according to the public transport system? For example, metro. So transit-oriented development is actually more about the metros. So metro rail lines, these projects would be there. So the way the connectivity is there, like let's say residential complexes, official complexes, hospitals, amusements, whatever. So the urbanization could be centered around this. More of India is going to be urbanized, so why not use this opportunity and have a transit-oriented development? Right, so that is the idea. Okay, so 1 second. So let me just give you a definition of TOD. So transit-oriented development is a type of urban development that maximizes the amount of residential, businesses, and leisure space within the walking distance of public transport. So you have to briefly explain. Just a second. Yeah. So you have to briefly explain what is transit-oriented development, give a brief definition of this. Then how would it help? So it would help address the issue of haphazard urban growth. Right? It will lead to creation of better urban mobility that is sustainable. So less reliance on road-based or private mobility, motorized transport. Then it is centered around city densification. That is, when you're looking at having more and more of population along the transit areas. So we have to make this vertical construction, the vertical complexes. So on a particular area of land, more housing is there. So city densification will be promoted. So it will free up area which can be used for, let's say, parks, amusement centers, cultural recreational activities, etc. Right, so these are certain things. It will also lead to better urban governance because it is easier to handle all these assets. So this is the document that I've taken from the National Transit Oriented Development Policy, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Right then, so this concludes the session. My laptop says this is it. Please switch it off or put it on charging. Right. So this is it. Bye bye. Take care and all the best.